So let's start with some intros. We heard from Tiffany already. Let's talk, Madeline. Let's tell us who you are.
Sure. Thank you, Jesse. My name is Madeline Key. Unfortunately, my dad, independent inventor Stephen Key, couldn't make it here today. But thankfully, I have been his writing partner for over 15 years now, educating small inventors about how to be entrepreneurs. We've been writing for Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur Magazine about entrepreneurship with a specific emphasis on product licensing, because we feel the licensing business model breaks down a lot of barriers that entrepreneurs often face to commercialize their creativity. The best part of my job has been and remains interviewing really fascinating people. My background is as a journalist, and I trained here at Berkeley at the Daily Cal, so it's really fun to be back on campus, and studied peace and conflict, so I'm giggling a little bit being at the business school. And I'm excited to speak on this panel. I think a lot of what we do is work directly with people who are very creative, who don't necessarily identify as inventors. They're very unfamiliar with IP and the patent process, and we break it down in a way that's very easy to understand, and more so is encouraging. I think there can be a lot of fear associated with IP. You need to get IP to protect from something, to prevent. And I think there's a much more positive spin that can and should be put on it, which is what can you do with IP? And I think that there's no doubt in my mind that stronger IP rights are better for entrepreneurs. Absolutely.
Right. We've had some great conversations leading up to this, Madeline and Tiffany and Jeremiah. So we just want to continue that conversation and share it with you all. And I got some great questions, I think, that we can get to. So Jeremiah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, everyone. Really appreciate it. My name is Jeremiah Chan. I lead the patents licensing and open source team at Meta, formerly known as Facebook. The reason why I'm here today is my team and I actually spend quite a bit of our time focusing on diversity and innovation. First and foremost, kind of with the inventor community, many of you probably know that women and people of color are drastically underrepresented as inventors in the country. And so really the innovative narrative in our country is pretty wildly broken. And so we work with the industry and within our own company on how do we fix this? How do we better engage underrepresented inventors? We're also working on actually introducing and promoting more diversity in the patent profession. We've heard from countless inventors who kind of asked us, every patent attorney I seem to work with seems to be a white male. Like, why is that? It seems a little strange. And so we got a program that we rolled out last year called the Patent Pipeline Program, where we're actively training people how to do patent prosecution and then actually placing them with a number of participating law firms to start as full-time technical specialists at these firms. So we're creating more diversity in the patent profession. And then finally, I would say I do a lot of work with the US Patent Office in a part-time role that I have on PPAC, where I'm working with the Innovation Expansion Committee, where the USPTO is working on lots of different initiatives to actually promote greater diversity in innovation as well. And so happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Well, fantastic. So I'm going to ask some questions, and each of you can chime in on the answer, what you think. So I was out for a walk this morning. I'm staying in Emeryville. And so I'm a patent attorney, an IP attorney. And so I'm always thinking about IP. I teach IP through my own nonprofit and through a group called the National Society of Black Engineers to do kind of what Jeremiah is talking about, getting more engineers into this patent space. But I'm always thinking about IP. So I'm walking around Emeryville, and I'm looking at different stores, and I'm looking at different businesses. And there's Bob's dry cleaning. So my question is, then I'll give a little explanation. My question is, who is intellectual property for, is the question. So, but let me a little more. So I'm walking around and I see precision auto cleaning. I see Bob's Diner. I see Mel's Diner. And then come around the corner and I see Best Buy. I see Target. So, Bob's Precision Cleaning, they don't care if there's another Bob's in Chicago. They don't care if there's another auto place or auto body with the same name in another state. But Best Buy certainly cares about another electronics place that's called Best Buy. Target cares that there's someone else called Target. So the question is, who is intellectual property for?
I absolutely love this question. It's something I think about all the time because intellectual property is sometimes framed for creative people and for inventors, but if you look at actually the numbers of who is filing patents, who is filing trademarks, that's not necessarily reflected in a small business owner and a creator. And I think that part of that is due to explicitly the price associated with a patent, and also the fact that patent rights are a lot weaker than they used to be. There's a lot more uncertainty in the system. So I think there's a calculus for someone who's running their own small business that has to make really, really critical decisions about the money that they spend and what they're going to do with that. That may be a large corporation who can file tons of patents and brag about the number of patent applications they filed this year is, to me, often really out of loop, because I feel that the people who IP is for is creative people, or is people, anyone who has an idea that not only wants to patent it, but share it with the world. So to me, it's IP is for entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tiffany?
Yeah, I would say IP is for everyone that's creative, even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur. I mean, there's a couple of things to intellectual property. One, it's the story, right? So if you look at patents, it's an archive of all these ideas and inventions, who did it, when, at a basic level, what it was. So we can go back and see that, X, Y, and Z, that Patricia Bath, is one of the inventors and has 5 patents on, treating cataracts with lasers, right? Mm-hmm. Which her name is just starting to come up. I've been advocating for her to be in the Inventors Hall of Fame. If we didn't have the patents to track that story probably would have been lost. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, if you're going to be an entrepreneur as well, it's having that leeway to, extract value from your creativity. But I also want to go back to what intellectual property is, as well as who it's for. A lot of times when we think of IP, we only think of patents, but there's copyright, there's trademark, as well as patents. And in that case, I feel it's for all business owners, but the processes and the system is broken. It takes too long and it costs too much money, except for copyright.
Well, copyright also, even trademark, you can get trademark rights without filing. When you use your name in business, you're getting some protection. Right. Same thing with copyright.
Yeah. But I think copyright is the best of it, the best process out of all of them. And thank God for, it was a 1983 Apple suit that started to have code covered under the federal copyright laws. But as I mentioned in my speech, it's sort of copyright, then trademark in the middle, and then patents. It's for everyone, and it's necessary. But as entrepreneurs, a lot of times we just don't have time for the trademark and the patent side of it.
It's funny because Jeremiah, I'll get to you in a second. It's funny, we all have our areas of expertise, and Bruce chides me because I'm a patent guy, engineering school, and I was a patent examiner. I talk about patents too much, so it's funny for me to hear you say copyright is tops. I think patents are top. Jeremiah, so is it for everyone? Our panelists have said patents or IP is for everyone. What do you think?
Yeah, I think my panelists have made some great points. I'm going to choose my words very wisely in how I answer your question, Jesse, and say it should be for everyone, and it's not, right? And I think about one conference I spoke at around diversity and innovation. After the conference, I went to pick up my son from school, and he's always asking me, really targeted questions. So what'd you do today, Dad? And I said, I spoke at a conference about diversity and innovation. And he said, oh, who do you think are the most prolific inventors in our country's history? I'm like, and so off the top of my head, I started to rattle off a number of inventors. Got through probably after about 5 minutes, 20 or so inventors. And all of a sudden, my son looks at me and says, hey, Dad, every single inventor you named is a white male, right? And I was like, yeah. And so when I said before that the innovation narrative is broken in our country, that's a great signal that it is, right? If I can't come up with anyone beyond a white male who is a prolific inventor in our country, it's not that people of color and women are not as innovative, not as smart, it's that the system isn't working for them. And so this is what I mean by it should be for everyone, and we know it's not, right? The USPTO has published their report, Progress and Potential, you can't really argue with the data, right? And I've talked to countless companies who've looked at the data within their employee base and have found the same things, which is a massive gap between representation in technical roles and activity in patenting. And for many companies that we're all familiar with, I mean, it comes with lots of benefits when you are able to get your name on an application, right? Not even talking about bonuses that you may get at a lot of companies when you do file a patent, but also you get to stick that on your resume. It starts to become part of your body of work that's really important for career opportunities and growth. So it really should be for everyone, and it's really not. The other point I would make too, and we talked a little bit about this, Jesse, but one of the resident superheroes that my team looks up to is the CEO of and founder of Spanx, a company that really kind of revolutionized the undergarment industry. And if you haven't heard Sarah Blakely's story, it's really kind of eye-opening, right? Sarah Blakely was this innovator who developed this really revolutionary idea for undergarment. She went to a bunch of patent attorneys. She actually wanted to work with a female patent attorney and couldn't find a single one in the entire state of Georgia. And so she said, okay, I guess I can't find a female patent attorney. I guess I'll go to a bunch of males. So she did. And all of them said, this is not patentable. We don't really see an invention here that's worthwhile. So she ended up having to go to the library, the public library, found a book on how to draft patents, did it herself. It kind of reminded me of Tiffany's story in the last talk, but she just did it herself, drafted the application, and then asked a bunch of attorneys who would be willing to just draft the claims portion of the patent and file it for her. She finally found someone, and even that male patent attorney was hesitant until his own daughter looked over his shoulder and said, Dad, this looks like a really neat idea. And then he did it. And fast forward now, multi-billion-dollar company, Sarah Blakely is one of the most wildly successful innovators, entrepreneurs in our country. But it was not easy. You can kind of see all the barriers she had to overcome that other males would not even have to deal with, right? And so this is what I mean, how it should be for everyone, but we know it's not. And there are countless stories that show that.
Right, and so Madeline, you kind of touched on this a moment ago when you were talking, and so my next question is about IP education. We're all about IP education. This is the IP Awareness Summit. So how do we, it's if we're going to do IP education, which we're doing, who do we teach, and what do we teach them?
That's a great question. I'm inclined to agree with Tiffany and people like Dr. Gary Michelson, who have been very clear about saying IP education should start very early, that first graders are perfectly capable of understanding broad concepts about ownership, property, even the idea that you can own an idea or you might be entitled to protect it, profit from it. I think that has to be brought in very early and at a young age to begin to democratize IP. If it's presented in a way that's not like Nike has a lot of trademarks and this is the way that they've protected them, but here's how you might approach an idea that you have, you might start a company. And I think that has to be perfectly honest, I think it has to be fun because innovation, creativity, invention are inherently playful. There is an element there that fits a little uncomfortably in the academic paradigm, which is very you fail or you lose, or you fail or you succeed. If we want people to think inventively, we need to throw out a lot of those concepts about how we're even defining academic success if we want to teach these ideas in school. And that sometimes I feel overwhelmed with just how difficult that might be. But I think it needs to be in a language people can understand, and that scales up and evolves as you get older. It needs to be experiential. You can't just learn about these ideas. You need to put them into practice. You need to try and fail. And I think those ways could be transformative for all of society.
Well, something we talked about yesterday as we were walking and talking, a lot of people get into the system, and I'll let the other people respond as well, and there's people get jaded. I wrote down the question jaded, and I had it in my notes. People are jaded by the system. We know that. Small vendors we hear it all the time on the internet. The IP system doesn't work for the small person. Can we teach that? Can all of us who do education, and your company does something a little different, in terms of the licensing, maybe we teach licensing instead of this idea that I can get a patent and make a bunch of money. We need to do it, and we even talked about this. How did this idea get there that the patent is going to be like an automatic pot of gold,
Yeah, so, I have a lot of feelings about this, but I think that these topics are very nuanced because there's the theory of how a patent is defined and how it's actually happening in practice, and that A patent doesn't protect anything. It entitles you to maybe defend something that you have created, and you need a lot of access to resources to do that. That's what we hear extremely consistently from independent inventors. And so, yeah, I think we have to be really careful about how we talk about these ideas, because if you Google what is a patent, you will hear the same information over and over. And functionally, that's not really how patents are working or being used. You cannot stop someone from stealing your idea because you have a patent. But yet you will every inventor I've ever talked to, I spend a lot of time on social media, engaging with them on YouTube and otherwise, that idea is rock solid ingrained. Have patent, won't be stolen, and that's just not true.
Have patent, get rich.
Have patent, get rich. And I think that there's so much more that's very interesting about IP education that doesn't have to do with either of these ideas, either theft or profit. They need to be woven in. They're part of, definitely, Tiffany, you spoke to that trajectory of filing IP and then almost immediately having someone either outright take it or claim it as theirs. So that's a difficult thing to talk to about kids, but I think that we have to start trying to.
So
and it's okay, right? First off, I want to say to Jeremiah, at some point I want to meet your son, and we have to activate together. But yeah, everything that both you and Madeline were saying in relation to this, I think so much of it is also exposure. So we and to me, this is very similar to entrepreneurship, because the first company I founded was in the 80s, and back then entrepreneurship wasn't sexy, and then as it was becoming sexier, there was this mindset of it was almost like winning the lottery. Immediately you start a company, you become a gazillionaire. People only knew it sort of from the movies, because most people hadn't started their own companies, especially in the tech space. And then as more people got into it, they realized, like a lot of career paths, there's a spectrum of success. Not everyone's going to start a company and be a gazillionaire. When I teach it as practical creativity. First off, that there's artistic creativity, as creativity in general, and then it splits into artistic creativity and practical creativity. Practical creativity is inventing things and stuff and ideas, and artistic is the music and the whatever. And people, even kids, when I was speaking to the middle schoolers in Atlanta last week from that video, when I started off by saying, how people will copyright songs, and then you'll see these things online where, Jack is saying Sue stole their song, and there's this whole thing, or you have all these people that, want to be singers or artists and love it, but not all of them are going to get Grammys. But that doesn't mean that the ones that didn't get Grammys or make a gazillion dollars aren't happy in the career that they chose because it was what they always loved doing as a child. Well, innovation and invention is the same way. My whole life is basically a play out, and I don't know if this makes me look good or bad, right? My whole life is basically a play out of what that little girl in the 70s was imagining with the Afro puff. Like, I just never let go of my imagination and have tremendously enjoyed my life as a result. Could I have made more, for example, if I had stayed on Wall Street, or probably wouldn't be as happy and as satisfied as I am in life. So I share with them that as a career path. And so a lot of it's exposure therapy versus a get-rich-quick scheme.
Right.
So Jeremiah, same question. So I don't know if we talked about this a couple of days ago. I have a question that says, and it's the same topic, can you teach IP without the P? Can you teach intellectual property without teaching property law? You're an attorney, I'm an attorney. Property law is the foundation for intellectual property. So usually when I teach students or even adults, I start off with a primer about property law. And for 20 minutes, I do real property and do personal property and talk about different concepts of property law, abandonment, ownership, different things like that. And then I get into intellectual property. So Jeremiah, do you have any, if you're teaching intellectual property, do you have any kind of way that you think is most effective, or certain concepts you think are more important?
I do think, I would agree with what a lot of what my panelists said, which is, discovering kind of that fun experience of problem solving, right? I think that is missing from kind of even at early education And there aren't that many organizations that are tackling that, right? Like we talked yesterday about the National Inventors Hall of Fame that I think last year sent out 250,000 invention kits to kids all over the country, specifically trying to reach students of color and girls on like just practicing the fun of inventing, and you can design circuits and program robots with these kits. And I think that's just a real missing part of the curriculum right now. I think the other part that we need to address too is just the systems of oppression that are at play, right? And what I've seen quite a bit in surveys that we've done internally, and also talked to a lot of other companies that have done surveys of their inventor communities, you see one question that I've talked to a number of folks about, which is this idea of, would you define yourself as an inventor? Do you qualify as a quote unquote inventor? And you always find that the percentage of men who say yes compared to women is far greater. Now, that's not just a coincidence. I mean, you look back at the history of laws, policies, institutions that have discriminated against women and have told them, you are not supposed to be an inventor. Like, that's not who you are. That doesn't just go away. You repeal a few laws, you give women the right to vote, and like that suddenly doesn't go away. So you're dealing with generations of inequity and discrimination that we need to remedy. And this is part of making sure that we create a system that is accessible to everyone. The other thing I would say too is I think about researchers that are doing some really great work in this area. Professors Delgado and Murray in particular have done some great work on how women innovate. A lot of the ways and the structures that we use to brainstorm with male inventors per se, they don't necessarily work for other groups of people. And so what we find with many of our female inventors is they like to collaborate more. They like to bounce ideas off of each other. They don't like to be in a big giant room with hundreds of people and then the loudest voice rules the day. And so you got to think about what are the types of environments and processes that work for all different types of people. And in some ways, it's got to be a little more bespoke, right? It's some people out there may say, well, anybody can file a patent or anybody can submit an idea. Yeah, they can, I mean, technically, but it doesn't really work for a lot of people and they don't really want to participate if you've got one size fits all. And so a lot of what we try to do, Jesse, is really try to work with our inventors and work with the different people, the clients that we work with, to make sure we understand what works for you, what system works for you. And so we do, we engage lots of consultants to do this. We try to make sure that our language and the way we engage is inclusive of all. And it's a lot of hard work, but that's what I would say, which is trying to tap into that fun experience of innovating and problem solving, but in a way where we make sure that no one's excluded.
So interesting. So Jeremiah, you mentioned the word generation or generational. Made me think about wealth. Here in America, through time, there's a book out by Richard Rothstein called The Color of Law. He talks about the discrimination in housing from 1940 to 1980 or so on, and how blacks were excluded from getting houses in certain neighborhoods, and so therefore, the wealth that has been created in white America has allowed people to fund businesses and send their kids to school and take care of their health and so on. So, and then there's a paper, Lost Einsteins. People know about this paper, Lost Einsteins, about who becomes an inventor in America. So a lot of it is tied to wealth. So Lost Einstein's paper says that very often the affluent are the inventors. Bill Gates and Zuckerberg went to Harvard, and Steve Jobs and Wozniak went to Berkeley, or maybe went to Berkeley, I'm not sure. So that part about wealth and invention. And so for all these small inventors, for these diverse inventors, if you want to get them, if IP is for everyone, how can they compete with this money? Where are they going to get this money from to support their ideas and to get them into the space, to file applications, to do R&D? Is that possible to even turn the tables or get people in the game? I mean, what do people think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at me. It was a hard journey, I have to say, because I didn't have the same level of resources. And I've been in the space for decades. I've mainly had men in the tech industry working for me, so it's been a reverse situation as a female leader and founder and co-founder. And so I'll see a lot of my male counterparts, and I'll take it on the chin because I feel, rightly or wrongly, that if I'm going to be a leader, and I am a leader, that I can't spend a lot of time complaining, But my suffering would be to an extent where many a times I thought I would be losing everything or only have a little bit of money left in my bank account, or losing my home and not having any family backstop that many of my friends and counterparts did. So even when they would talk about their suffering, how they bootstrapped and everything, I knew, being in the space, that they were crashing at their parents' like $1 million home in New York, and bootstrapping meant that they didn't have their own place, whereas I'm literally like, how am I gonna pay my rent next month while working these 20-hour days, or buying a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and making all the sandwiches that I can from it to eat until the money came in from the last license deal we had. I don't talk about that as much, but that to me, more than anything, is why we don't see the diversity in the industry, to your point. Not that women can't learn how to code or blacks can't, start a company, but because the process has so much suffering. Even if you're coming from a background like, Gates had help from his mom or whoever, right? The process is just a hard process, no matter who you are, to start something from nothing. But then if you layer on like being a female or being a person of color or being from a disadvantaged economic background, it becomes like most people, the fire gets to be too hot for them and they leave. So then the question is, how can you create a space of equity? I have some ideas around from tax laws to accessible money. So for example, a lot of women and people of color will do social enterprises. Many times even nonprofits, and I'm like, why are you doing nonprofits? Just do a social enterprise. But when you do these things in the beginning, the money for the types of things that they want to do is in the nonprofit space, so they feel forced to start a nonprofit. If we change the tax laws so that there's some category, like a startup class of category, whereas those first few years, if someone, you could get the same tax benefit if you give R&D or some sort of money in a corporate or foundation space to this social enterprise, that could make it more accessible. If we had more access to, if we could somehow as a country create a peer-to-peer network to simulate the friends and family round, which we don't have. Like my friends and family round was just wing and a prayer, like I will just keep going, even though it makes no sense for me to keep going.
I'm sorry. But you mentioned licensing in there. You mentioned licensing. So do we teach licensing more as a strategy for fundraising rather than this idea, I need to come out with my product, I need to manufacture it, I need to do all this sales myself? I'm talking to Madeline.
Yeah.
Is that something that we teach? We're talking about what to teach. Maybe we teach licensing more, we teach business more versus just diving in and filing a patent and then who knows what.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I think there are significant barriers to bringing any idea to life. That certainly is true in the startup model. If when I think about having to raise money as that being such an unbelievable gatekeeping role, that your idea is so big that you must rely on others to help you get off the ground. And frankly, that's why Steve was attracted to the licensing process to begin with, because as a person who has dyslexia, there were certain things that he didn't feel that he would be able to succeed at starting a business the traditional way. I mean, we know how many businesses fail. We know how hard that road is. And so I think in many ways, licensing allows the inventor, the creative, to focus on what they do best. And you certainly need to learn a lot of other skills to be successful at licensing, like negotiating, like communicating your ideas and marketing. But there's so fewer steps that are involved in building a team, sourcing manufacturing, and just become really difficult for any sole person to do on their own, period. And so if you don't have a lot of access to resources, and frankly, this is why I'm such a huge fan of provisional patent applications, is because it allows you to get the foot in the door, and you can negotiate maybe with your licensee to have them pay for the intellectual property, but then you own. So there's ways I think that we can teach people to go further with their ideas, which the licensing business model really allows for. You get that feedback. When you show marketing material to a company that might be interested, they're going to tell you what they think. They're going to say, yeah, no, this doesn't work for us at all, or here's what we would need that to be different. So you can get in the game without having to spend a bunch of money.
And one other thing that I wanted to add, if you're going the entrepreneur route versus the licensing route, which I wholeheartedly agree, not every inventor's meant to also start a company. But if you are choosing and you're more from a diverse group, for me, my mantra has been more first customer versus first investor. And it's sort of like what you were saying as well. At the end of the day, you're a company if you have customers and if you're satisfying them, and the amount of energy in the beginning to raise money versus getting a customer is similar. And that I was talking about sort of alternatives to the friends and family round. That has been one of my alternatives, is to immediately go for a first customer versus trying to spend all that time trying to find a first investor.
Jeremiah, can you weigh in on any of this?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very kind of deep and complex question. I'll give you kind of a practical response, and then I'll make another kind of broader comment. The practical is, something I feel like lots of people, when I talk to them, don't really know about or not aware of, is the pro bono network with the USPTO. So there's a whole national network of law firms that have agreed to do pro bono patent prosecution for inventors below a certain income level. And I'm always surprised at how few people know this. And I always tell the PTO that we need to advertise more, but it's a really valuable resource. When you think about a lot of those, really bright innovators and entrepreneurs who are at low income levels, can't really afford expensive patents, to be able to tap into those pro bono networks, of many of which are top tier patent firms out there. So that's one that's more practical. And then the broader comment to your question, Jesse, is it's really tough, right? I mean, this is part of why we have, right now a pretty controversial topic in California, which is the California Reparations Task Force. They've been kind of negotiating, how do we do this? How do we address the generations of discrimination and inequity? I'm glad we recognize it. I'm glad we figured out, like, this is a problem we need to deal with. And now they're trying to work out, like, what's fair? How do we make this a fair system? And so, they're talking about limiting it to, only people who can prove that they're descendants of slavery and all sorts of other conditions. But it just shows you how complicated it is in terms of, it exists, right? The systemic oppression and discrimination throughout generations. I think some people look at it as, well, that's, it's so long ago, I have nothing to do with that. The problem is, people in privilege and power, you may not acknowledge it, but you're in privilege and power at the expense of those marginalized people, right? And because it's generation after generation, you've got lots of these issues that my panelists and I are all talking about, which is like, it's just not, some of these opportunities are just not accessible to them, whether it's income level or whether it's they live in certain neighborhoods, they don't have access to similar programs. This is what we need to deal with.
Fantastic. So my last question before we get to some audience questions is, and Jeremiah kind of touched on some history there. So 1954 in America, Brown v. Board of Education. That was, schools were desegregated. That was maybe the first diversity and inclusion in America since, 1897, Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal was the law. 1954, schools are desegregated. And we have the Civil Rights Movement, and then we get to 1978, California v. Bakke, the case about college admissions. And so there were quotas in the admission system. You had to have a certain number of blacks or Hispanics or whatever. Supreme Court said that's not appropriate. We can't have quotas, but we can have race as a factor in college admissions. And that's when the word diversity kind of came into the national dialogue. And so since 1978 to now is 44 years since we've had diversity and inclusion, and it's a very popular way of doing things now, and everybody's promoting it. But we're talking about intellectual property, we're talking about empowering people. Do we encourage? Are we still about diversity and inclusion, or are we moving into diversity and ownership? And then, like Jeremiah was saying, how do we get people to think more about being owners, not just being included in society? I mean, even the panelists here, we could all start a company right here. Myself as a patent attorney, and Jeremiah and Tiffany, we can all, are we asking to be included? Are we looking for something more?
So my favorite word is agency versus inclusion, and I've my career path shows that I decided pretty young, because we've been trying to hack this issue for generations and generations and generations, that I was going to go for agency versus inclusion. So I'm definitely more of an ownership girl, and I think it's important for us to advocate more and more, and again, expose diverse communities to what that ownership path looks like and feels like. And it's different from what they see in the movies. There's actually, usually it's very messy. You're not going to be perfect at it. I think there's a higher penalty for a higher penalty towards failure if we sort of stumble. So just making sure to normalize that the stumbling is normal for everyone in this process. And that's also part of what I want to use my platform for as the 2022 Entrepreneur of the Year for Cornell, because Bruce didn't mention, but also in the nearly 40-year history, I'm the first Black woman to get this award as Entrepreneur of the Year. And part of it is because you have to have a body of work to show. And in my generation, there wasn't the perception that, well, Black women could do that. They could spend their whole lives being self-made and starting things. So I also just, want to get that story out there, because I think that is part of it. Working with students, working with from middle school to college, when they meet me and start to hear the stories, they immediately feel like I can do that, because they can.
Right, the stories are important. I mean, Jeremiah was saying his top 20 inventors were all of a certain demographic. So, right. So, Madeline, can you?
I'm glad you brought up storytelling, because I think that has a massively important role to play here, in that just in the past few years, I think we've seen the USPTO do a really amazing job of highlighting inventors whose names you've never heard of before, and a lot of women and a lot of people of color who are in the fight now and are not necessarily looking back on what they've been able to do, but are in the game, starting companies, have had maybe some success, but can really tell people what that's like. I think representation is incredibly important, and you cannot necessarily envision something for yourself if there's no prototype, no example. And I think that there's, particularly with women, there's this desire that I feel to be very supportive, to enable helping someone else's vision, which is amazing. But then, if I'm surrounded by other women who have furthered their ideas, it's impossible not to be inspired by that, and to think a little more deeply about, well, what do I want to contribute with my own voice and loudly? So I think we need to be speaking to the next generation with the widest possible representation of people. Every entrepreneur has overcome struggle, so the stories tend to be really interesting, and there's a bajillion takeaways, and I couldn't agree with you more about the messiness. It's never this path that we like to look back and it's just this ascendant tail. It's and you're failing, then you're picking yourself back up again. And I think big picture wise, that's a mentality that's useful not only in business, but just in life, that you get to start over again, that we're going to try and fail, but if you keep trying, you're probably going to have some success. Yeah. Jeremiah,
can you close us out with your thoughts?
Yeah, I will. I could listen to my panelists all day, I feel like, but I appreciate the question too, Jesse, because I try to think a lot about the words that we use. And so this whole idea of inclusion versus power, versus agency. When I think about inclusion, which is a word that's thrown around a lot these days, it's a popular word. I guess I would say I like it, I don't like it, and I like it for different reasons, right? So one reason I would say is, one of the mentors that I kind of follow is Vernae Myers, right? And I think she coined the phrase, diversity is being invited to the party, and then inclusion is being asked to dance. Well, when we actually think about that, who gets to invite people to the party, and then who gets to ask them to dance, right? And so I don't like that. I don't like that there's still kind of this whole power structure that's solidified in that framing, which is only certain people in privilege and power. They're the ones who actually get to throw the party. And then we say, can we please be invited? Will you please ask me to dance? What? Like that's the very definition of inequity, right? Only some people have the power and privilege to do that. On the other hand, I would say, you know why I like it? I like it because it acknowledges power and privilege. I think sometimes we don't really think about that enough. And I was talking to you about this yesterday, Jesse, but like I look across many of the law firms and corporate legal departments, that I interact with a lot. Across the board, I think at one point I just listed out who are all the chief diversity officers at all these companies and law firms. They're like 95% people of color and marginalized folks. So we're putting them in these positions and then we're saying, oh, go make change happen. The truth is they are not in positions of power and privilege. And so we kind of ignore that and we say, oh, they should be able to bring meaningful change, when the truth is they don't really have all the power and they don't really have all the authority to make big changes happen, because we all know it takes a lot to actually move the needle and make change happen. And so that's one thing I like about it, which is the words diversity and inclusion specifically acknowledge the positions of power that are at play and just remind us that we need to change that. We need to recognize it and change that.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah. Any questions or comments? Yeah. That was powerful.
So Jesse, this is something you and I talked about a little bit last night at dinner. Tiffany, I appreciated your comments. You were highlighting the different pieces of IP, copyright, and trademark and patents. But one piece that I think is a growing part of capturing innovation through trade secrets and know-how, right? And I know that's not something that you guys have talked about. So I'm curious, and I know Jeremiah, Facebook and your company has, I'm sure, captured a lot of that through your innovation spectrum as well. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that way of capturing innovation.
Anybody? Sure. Jeremiah, anyway?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We spend a lot of time on kind of management of confidential information and trade secrets. So within the company, we've got lots of kind of programs and training that we're doing. But I would say even outside, it's probably the example is even more relevant. And for whatever it's worth, I've been thinking a lot about this as I've listened to my panelists kind of tell their experiences and stories. But we've done, I think, a pretty nice job in the last couple of years during the pandemic of hiring people of color, attorneys of color on the team. And I think part of it is, there's a number of reasons, but part of it is during the pandemic, we went way more remote. And so our recruiting net got a lot broader, and we were able to recruit from lots of parts of the country that we never really hired from before, that actually allowed us to tap into rich sources of talent. But I have a number of attorneys of color on my team who, like some of my talented panelists, like they've got side businesses that are very successful. And the couple of folks that I'm thinking about, like neither of them came from a lot of wealth or money at all, right? And so they kind of figured out through the power of entrepreneurship and innovation, really kind of interesting ideas in both respects, and we're able to make those into businesses that are doing really, really well. And a lot of it is kind of deciding, what type of IP is appropriate to protect the proprietary information we have. And so I think a lot of the mentoring they do and a lot of the discussions I have with them is, there's some stuff you really, really don't want out there. And so if we figured out some secret sauce, like that's when you want to make sure you keep it really top secret, because that's part of the crown jewel for your business. And I've heard them talk to a lot of other kind of, young entrepreneurs who want to kind of start their own ideas and businesses with that advice that they used and actually used to their benefit to create some really profitable businesses. So I think a lot of it's really important to understand what are the bundle of IP rights, and then which ones are appropriate for what you're trying to do and the type of proprietary information you're dealing with. So I think it's a great question.
Yeah, I gave a talk to some business owners in Prince George's County the other day, and I call it internal facing IP and external facing. And the same kind of question about external is, what your competitors can find out, and maybe that's the information you try to protect in terms of a patent, a trademark, copyright. Then there's the internal facing IP you can protect with employment agreements and non-disclosure agreements, non-compete agreements, possibly. So to me, it's part of the education process. And this is things that we all know as patent attorneys and professionals, and we just have to figure out who to teach it to and what to teach. Anyone else had any questions or thoughts? Yes.
Yeah, that's a great discussion, and obviously diversity is such an important issue. So it's great to see this panel focus on it. One comment I have, and then I have a question for the panel. One comment I have in response to Jeremiah's point, I just want to make sure that people understand the pro bono program is called the Patent Hubs of the United States. It was an initiative started by David Capo's American Invents Act, and all states have a hub that covers low-income inventors. There's one in California. I'm privileged to be a part of one at Chicago-Kent for Illinois. And just to give you a little bit of the success of the program, just this past year, the sort of inventors who were helped by our hub, the majority were African American women. And in terms of actual representation and securing law firm help to file applications, also the highest representation group were black women. So that is one sort of thing to potentially support in terms of donations to your hub of your state, or if you're a patent attorney, to get involved to help low-income inventors receive, top quality legal assistance. I think the hard part is, this ties back into Tiffany's point about funding, the hard point is afterwards, if they do secure a patent, what do you do with it? And our hub does try to provide some referrals to Chicago-based innovation sort of hubs that do help inventors, but it's not a national sort of program of the kind that the patent hubs are. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a plug for patent hubs. The question I have for the panel, one issue that seems to be lurking in this discussion about diversity and also the power dynamics is the issue of ownership of IP. And obviously that's a very contentious issue, especially in copyright, with, for instance, the music industry and, Taylor Swift owning her masters is one recent controversy. Snoop Dogg just acquired back the masters to his early recordings with Death Row Records, as another example. We don't see it as much discussed in the patent, field, but other countries give ownership rights of patents to the employees and not to the employers. Germany, for example, recognizes that the patents go to employees, and the employers have a statutory right to buy out that patent. So my general question in terms of the issue of diversity and IP is, how do you view the issue of ownership of IP? How important is that? And do we need changes in terms of the thinking about ownership?
Anyone?
So I definitely think
we have 30 seconds for a response.
Okay.
Okay.
I definitely think we need change, and I am very pro-ownership because I feel that feeds into the innovation and transformation and the benefit that we get from it in society. If you look back, I think it was in the 1700s that these laws were first started, first in the UK and Britain, and then by 1790 in the US, and then throughout Europe. And I wholeheartedly believe that's also a reason why we started to accelerate the Industrial Revolution and all those other things, because there was a direct link between ownership and imagination and invention. So I'm pro that, and I will definitely look at Germany's laws now, because I think that could be an interesting model for us in the US to take it further.
Yeah, it's always something to learn.
Thank you, panel. We're running out of time.